So we are the Trinity Inclusive Curriculum Project, and we commenced in October 2020 with funding from the Higher Education Authority. We're based in the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Unit in order to form part of the wider EDI agenda Trinity. And our mandate is to embed the principles of diversity, equality and inclusion across the curriculum in Trinity. So this is our team. That you might know some of us, and this is a welcome and an introduction to the rest of us. We've got Dr. Rachel Poor, who is our academic project director. Myself, Derina Johnson, I am the project manager. We've got Sean Adderley over there, who is the student partner liaison and also our comms officer, and he is managing the online chat today. And then we've got Ross Coleman, who's our wonderful graduate intern. So just very, very quickly, we have 4 different pillars of our project. We have academic, student, institutional and infrastructural. In terms of our academic, this is part of that. Our academic is about how do we implement it in all the workings of the everyday practices of people across college. And we've got a school champion program, which is working with academics who actually teach, or other kind of educational support staff as well. Because it's really kind of embedding it in the everyday practices. And the student part is really important because it comes it's all about looking at supporting awareness raising of inclusion challenges as well as best practices and looking at it in real time, what's happening and what are the realities for our students right now. And of course, that's why we've got the student partner program. And of course, Reece is one of those wonderful student partners. And then the institutional is very much Rachel's part, which is potentially one of the most more challenging areas because we've had such amazing uptake elsewhere, but we're getting there in terms of embedding inclusivity in college policies. So getting inclusivity there when you're creating modules, having to kind of think about this and kind of reflecting upon it. And then we work with our colleagues across college in terms of who are supporting our students as well. And that's our wraparound pillar. The library is really important partner in that, as well as Trinity Access, Disability Services, all those wonderful other kind of wraparound services that, without which Trinity would not actually succeed. And so this is the module. It's a 20-hour 8-week module. This is the first webinar of it for those of you who are kind of already enrolled, for those of you who are not and may be interested in it. And we do intentionally keep it light touch because we understand that you're kind of adding this on around the rest of your work. And we want this to be useful and not onerous. And so it's a lot of it is around self-directed learning. And we do have a Blackboard module. There have been some technical issues getting you all up there this time around, but I will get there this week, I'm determined. And that will just help you in terms of your self-directed learning. Then we'll be setting you up into peer groups. I'll be doing that later on this week because I'm just leaving it open for a couple of days now, just in case after this module there are other people going to be signing up. And we'll be setting you into peer groups and you'll be invited to meet for I think about 2 or 3 times throughout the next 8 weeks. Then we've got these webinars now in the middle and at the end for you to kind of come together as a community of practice. And then at the end of the module, you'll be invited to kind of to complete a kind of a reflection piece on how you've implemented or plan to implement UDL in your practice. And then through that, you will be getting the digital badge and universal design for learning that it will be given from the National Forum for Teaching and Learning. So as it says here, this is all about +1s and quick wins and one change that you can make tomorrow and to start on your inclusive or your UDL journey. So without further ado, I am going to invite Mary up. I just realized actually I need to get your slides. So just 1 second. I realize I'm here. So just bear with me one.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Quirke. Thank you, Derina, for that very warm welcome. A big shout out of gratitude to all my colleagues in the School of Education, both students and staff. This morning, I'll be touching on a lot of the concept. Away is maybe to know how to simple as it sounds, and yet it is. Just harking back to, I suppose, my own youth, good old Cindy Lauper, caught up in circles, confusion is nothing new. I think that's something I certainly identified with as I started to develop this presentation. So now just... Okay, so as I said, I'm Mary Quirke. I'm actually a PhD candidate. I mightn't look it, but I am in the School of Education. My topic is Inclusion, Universal Design for Learning and Career Guidance. And for anybody who wants to know, this presentation will involve PowerPoint with images and text and slides. And for the images that actually are pertinent and matter, I will speak to the images. The slide. So I just want for a moment for you to think about how many of you struggle with time, and having had the morning we've had, and we've all had to grapple with it, maybe just to think about that a little bit. Sometimes it's too much, too little. Sometimes we're chatting. Take a moment to think about that, and maybe stop for a moment to think about what your coping strategy is. It might be a cup of coffee, it might be screaming into a brown paper bag, it might be that you've no opportunities rather than problems. So we really do need to shift our thinking. And as we look to our students and colleagues out in classrooms and lecture halls, I suppose what I'm asking is that we read the room and that we recognise that there's always a struggle there. It doesn't have to be labelled or identified, but maybe we need to think about how we're going to identify with that. Life is fast and busy at the moment, and there is no doubt about that. So I'm going to share with you maybe 3 steps, my 3 takeaways to think from a place of empathy. I mean, we're all challenged differently. There's no doubt about it. Sometimes it's by the same thing. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes the challenge has more than one solution. And sometimes the solution just doesn't work. It works for somebody else. And I think the starting place, and if the only takeaway you had from this morning was that we redesign with understanding. And I think that's what we just did by moving over to this room here today. So the show is still going on, Derina. We need to recognize that time has framed how we think. And not just talking, we know, we learned about inclusion, and we do need to respect that culturally. And there is quite a context from that. Inclusive design thinking really only started in the late 1980s. And I've been greeted myself when I've gone out and talked about universal design for learning that, you know, is that not just something new? Is it just a fad? I personally believe it's an awful lot more. And I'd say a lot of new thinking was often met with the same resistance because it involves change and it's something new. But we are coming from a place where there was a lot of tradition and a lot of kind of, I suppose, different approaches very much set in stone with regards to thinking about inclusion, particularly about inclusion in learning. And while a lot of my own thinking was framed around the models of disability, and that's where universal design for learning first came from. It's not where it stopped, it's not where it stayed. And I really do stress that. But it did kind of originate from the social model of disability. But that traditional mindset of, you know, add-on supports are the answer, or it takes too much time. Do I really have to do it? So that's just inconvenient. Or maybe it needs to be someone else's time. Go down there to the expert. They'll sort you out. I can't do that. I know nothing about that. I don't understand it. That's a traditional mindset. And I suppose that's really what we're asking people to shift. Is that it's both a philosophy and a practice. It's not just guidelines. It needs to be much more than that. So inclusion and learning, there's been different perspectives all around. And I suppose we have to respect that it's not that people got it wrong in the past, maybe they did, but it's all to do with context. So when we stop and think about what challenges our colleagues had in the past that we don't have today, you know, even by virtue of language, where the English language is spoken and taught, I'm going to throw up George Salmon himself faced his own challenges, and I can read the room here and see that a lot of us are women. We wouldn't be allowed in if he had had his way. But, you know, just to stop and think about what people perceive to be their challenges, and maybe then reframe it in terms of what new challenges do we have on our campus today. And rather than getting caught up on old challenges, we need to be able to recognise, quite honestly, the new challenges that are out there.
Oh, sorry. Our Zoom colleagues are saying that occasionally the sound freezes and or stops. So if you just slow down, and then we mean that when it freezes, they won't miss so much. Is that okay? Can you say that into the speaker?
That's no problem. I'll slow down. The Quirke lady will learn to speak slower. Yeah, I'm known for speaking quick when I get going. You're fine. Okay, so I suppose really what we're talking about here is, as I said, step one, and if it's the only takeaway you have, is start from a place of understanding and empathy. Consider who your thinking matters for, whether that's colleague, student, family, friend. Step two is think from a place of opportunity. And this is why I think this is our time. And I'm very much playing with time here in this presentation, but this really is our time. And I, for one, have been waiting for it for a long time. Because what we're surrounded by at the moment is good design and design thinking, and just putting up there an image of simple watch. And it was once a grandfather fob watch, then it became a digital watch. Now it's a smart watch, but it's still a watch. And some of us like it and some of us don't. But I suppose what we need to respect is that design thinking is a way of thinking. It's a way of working. It thrives on relationships, choices, and consciously deciding what you want. And if we think about designing our next chat, we go and chat to everybody, what works for you, what did you like? And this is before we ever approach or bring design thinking into learning. And the biggest bit is it can be messy. Sometimes you choose something and you change your mind. You don't like it after all, or it doesn't work. And we have to allow a little bit of a space for that. Universal design was the theory that was a design approach that came from architecture and built environment by Mace, together with Story and Muller. And they put together 7 principles, and it was about taking that design thinking and bringing it into technology, products and buildings so that they could ensure that they were accessible for the most people possible. Now, there are 7 principles, and I would ask you to have a look. I do have an image of the old library up there in Trinity on the left, because there was a time when they thought that was a good design. It was a good idea to put the books all the way up at the top shelf. I, for one, would be challenged to reach those. Now, there is online learning, and others might find themselves challenged with regards to that. So it's always, again, touching back to my step 1 with respect to empathy. And universal design thinking, which was in the physical environment, was brought into the learning environment by our good colleagues in Asst and a number of others in the States. And I think very much a lot of our thinking here on this side of the world has been framed by UDL, which is the Ast's way. And there's 3 pillars and a lot of guidelines in and around engagement, representation, and action and expression. And these were built on research based on Vygotsky and pedagogical theories, again, looking at how we design learning for the greatest number of users possible. And there is a number of guidelines, and they have a very informative website. Now, I would also say that UDL as a phrase tends to be used a little bit broader than just CAST. And it's starting to be used in the context of, oh, I know UDL, or I've UDL'd it. And sometimes people will use that expression and they mightn't even be aware that it originated with CAST. And that's okay. It means it's taking hold, and that's a good thing, because they see it as a design approach in a learning environment where most people can be included. But I think the biggest challenge that we face in our time is that we need a sustainable approach for inclusion. We need to get this bedded down. So it's our time to change direction. It's never a done deal. It's never a checklist that you do, it's done, it's grand, because that might work for one person, but it mightn't work for someone else next week. And we have to respect that and be responsive to that. So step 3 is the obvious, really. It's about taking the time, because this does take time. Anything that involves change takes time. And I think the most helpful things as I was thinking about this, putting this together, the first one is make the connections, talk to people. There's a number of colleagues over in the School of Education, and I can see my colleague Joanne there behind, you know, who are pushing this and promoting this all the way. And it's great to have colleagues like that. And Conor McGuckin and Patricia McCarthy would also be working with me on a publication very soon. We need to consider the intersectionality of people. Everyone is different. There's no one or two people the same. So we need to be mindful of that all the way, but it also means that they have an opinion that they can bring to the table with respect to designing. We need to reconsider where advice and expertise fit in. And I think for me, this is a very big one, because it really is around the power struggle. Who says they know what's best? More often than not, it's not the learner, and it should be. And I can say that as the learner. You need to think the effect that all of these movements have on your own work. Because very often we think about learning being in the School of Education, but it could be in the science lab. It could be over in the School of Computer Science. You know, it could be here in the library. And sometimes people think, well, that doesn't quite work here, or it doesn't quite work with this curriculum. But if you go back to the space of taking the design thinking approach, you can make it work, and you can look at it and you can say, well, how will it work? What are the challenges here? And various disciplines do need different approaches, particularly if there's professional placements, if there's internships, if there's lab experiences. Very often the principles of UDL work on the presumption that you're sitting in a classroom or a lecture hall, and it's quite straightforward. But the beauty of design thinking is you can make it your own, and why shouldn't you? So the inclusive education environment, and I've always said for most people, is about differing levels of support. It never negates the need for add-on support. And that is so important. It doesn't mean that we can't stop to think about that time when somebody might need the one-to-one. It's responsive because it takes that into consideration at different times. It's intuitive because it looks at grouped need. Students with dyslexia and students with visual impairments and students where English isn't their first language might all have the same need. It's looking at need. It doesn't look at label, and it doesn't seek to define you. And it can also be very personal because it really helps you to realize your opportunity. It helps you to be the best that you can be. But it is a balancing act. And I think this is the biggest challenge for it because it involves collaborating with your community, and you must include the learners. And I can thank back there, sorry. Okay, that presentation, that slide was supposed to wobble, and I was to thank my daughter for that, to show you the balancing act. So I'm sorry about that, but it does actually wobble. It's like a slice of cake really, rather than a triangle, because I think it's all the time moving. So to conclude, I suppose if you're going to adopt a UDL attitude or a mindset to think and approach your work in education, whatever you're teaching or learning, I would conclude with saying that you need to think with care. You appreciate your own understanding of inclusion, and at times that will be challenged, while adopting an ethical approach, doing what's right. Design to last, adopt and appreciate a reflexive inclusive approach. It's all the time moving and evolving. We need to consider inclusive engagement while acknowledging challenges as they arise. We need to always be mindful about exclusion and how somebody identifies it. It's not for us to judge or say, oh, you're not being excluded. Continuously rethink and redesign for inclusion, and take time to engage with others. Appreciate relationships in the broader ecology. You'll be very surprised at where your supports come from. So I suppose, harking back to the watch, and this is an image of a watch, and on the first slide I had an image of a watch face, and this is the inside of a watch. And it's really about reconsidering how we work as a team, and seeing it as a shared opportunity with all the cogs moving and moving each other along, all the time, keeping time, but moving forward in a very nice way. So I suppose my shout out to people this morning is to make the time and take the time and be part of the solution. Thank you.
We actually, we might have some time for some behind you actually. I was going to say we might have a couple of moments for questions if anybody has any.
Something that I find is when I think about universal design, I find it quite difficult when I think about the different ways that disability can appear. So I come from an autistic background, which is a household, and I know how diverse that need is. So when I start looking at my talking, I try and step back and go, okay, if this was my household, what would they need to try and do that and try and get as many books? But I think it is quite overwhelming, even the terminology to be used, what's appropriate for the different user groups that come in the inclusion bucket, for want of another word. It is a lot, and I think your talk's really, because it's actually like, you know what, just chuck the labels out, take it back to the beginning, and that's a really helpful takeaway, because I do find it quite overwhelming when I think about it, because of the terminology around there, not wanting to step wrong and offend people. I think is kind of something that I find the word.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I mean, we deal with difference every day. You just said you deal with it yourself at home, and yet you put up a dinner to catering to a diverse palate to 5 people. And, you know, we all deal with difference every day. And I think the problem, you know, very often the challenge is you come into a learning environment that traditionally had it, there's only one way. But that one way was designed predominantly for a certain type of person. Now, the further back in history we go, it was designed for also one gender and from one household, you know, so, and we've evolved from that, and we can see looking around this room how much we've evolved from that. So I think that starting from that place of I care, I think makes such a difference, because I think if you care, you're not seeking to offend, you're not seeking to exclude. And that is, it can be overwhelming. There's a change in language. There's any number of UDL, good guidelines, good practices. I think the only way you learn about it is dipping in and seeing what works for you. But I don't think anyone should say this is the only way.
Mary, could you just quickly summarize what the question was, because the people online couldn't hear it?
Okay, thank you. Sorry, the question was how it can be challenging sometimes when you think about the language used in disability, the different labels, the different needs, the different asks of people. And if you start looking at the language, the terminology and the different asks, that it can become quite overwhelming to meet all the varying needs. And how my presentation was found to be useful if you start with, you know, with the need and caring for people, and maybe just stepping back from that. And I will use your expression where you said, chuck it, chuck all that and just start again, because I like that. And I would say to people, there is nothing wrong with chucking all that.
A question here online. Do UDL principles differentiate between online, blended and in-person teaching, or are principles used for both?
The same principles can be used for both, but the principles are only there as a guidance. The principles, the 3 UDL principles by CASP were developed a number of years ago. And at the time when they were developed, it was for akin to our 2nd level setting. It was for to include students with disabilities in that kind of classroom setting at a 2nd level environment. They weren't considered for higher education or online, where learning happens in all sorts of places and spaces. But the beauty of them was the fact that they took this design thinking into the learning environment, and they gave us permission to stop and think about how can we make this work better. A little bit, I suppose, like we all did when we had to move online so rapidly at the beginning of COVID. Now, I'm a bit of a Luddite when it comes to online, and I can't say that I went on dancing, and some people possibly did. But, you know, equally, it's a challenge, and it was a challenge for everybody. There was those of us that liked it. There was those of us that didn't like it. We had to do it. Again, we're starting to move offline and engage with hybrid, and it's throwing up all sorts of challenges for people. So it's stopping to think and, you know, and as I said, designing is constantly evolving. I mean, I would challenge you all to ask, you know, how many of you still like the same music or wear the same clothes you did 10 years ago? You have to be ready to evolve. Online learning is evolving, so we have to be ready to consider inclusion at the heart of everything. And that's the big piece here.
Thank you so much, Mary. We might get you back in if we have a couple of minutes at the end, but I'd like to move on to asking everybody else. But thank you so much, Mary. It was absolutely amazing.
So I'm going to call on Julie Broderick. Julie, would you be able to introduce yourself and then say and then just take it away? Sorry, I'm just going to see. You're on mute.
Sorry, rookie mistake there. So thanks, Derina, and hi everybody in person and online as well. So Julie Broderick is my name. I'm one of the School of Medicine inclusive curriculum champions. So I have this role with Elizabeth Ford, my colleague, and I guess we've kind of journeyed together in this role for over a year, and we've had a bit of fun with it. We've experimented with it, and hopefully we've, you know, tangibly applied some of the principles of UDL into our own work, and then we've tried to kind of infiltrate that and percolate that through the kind of thinking in the School of Medicine to a certain extent. So I know this is really short, so I'm just going to talk quickly about some of the ways that I've integrated it myself in terms of my own teaching and practice. So the first thing to mention quickly, I guess, is structural changes to the presentation of teaching material. First thing is, I guess, Word documents. You know, there's really good information on the Trinity Inc. website about, you know, font size should be minimum 12. Certain fonts are quite good, like Arial. In terms of PowerPoint, again, some fonts are good, like Arial. Use a consistent format and a consistent template. You know, making good use of contrasting colors. I really try to do that, and really to circulate my teaching materials in advance, so students all have the opportunity to review it, you know, before the lecture, and that may help in terms of their learning. Also, to take advantage of Blackboard Ally, which is the kind of traffic light system that's integrated in Blackboard. And this is something that I've started to use now. And there's some good training resources in terms of that also available. And another kind of structural point that I've really tried to integrate is having a similar route in Blackboard for my students. So when they access the material, they know exactly what way it will be laid out, and how they will kind of navigate it. So generally, for most of my teaching sessions, I have 3 different folders. So prepare folder, which has the any reading material that I'd like them to have a look at before the lecture. Then a separate folder with the lecture notes. And that would be put up in advance. And then another folder called Extend, which is kind of additional reading material if they wish to access it or go deeper into the topic. So, you know, I think students find it helpful to know in advance how they will navigate the material and have it laid out in a consistent way. So that's my first point. Second point is just reading lists. I've really tried to kind of diversify my reading lists. Previously in my area of physiotherapy, it's a lot of journal articles, which are very text heavy, and, you know, kind of getting involved in this, I suppose the UDL principles, I've really realized that text heavy materials aren't so good for everybody. So now I try to include kind of an audio clip in my reading list. I would often put it down a website that students can navigate themselves. And, you know, good websites, even designed for lay audiences, can be very useful in terms of information just to lay the foundations of a topic. And, you know, if there's a suitable YouTube clip, I would put that up as well. So to try and think of diversifying the reading list and moving away from such text heavy focus. And the third thing is assessment. In, I suppose, areas like physio, other areas within the School of Medicine, we tend to be very focused on written exams. With COVID, obviously, we moved away to some more assignment-based modules. So I guess now we're trying to kind of like integrate, not go fully back to exams, because we realize the benefit of assignments for quite a number of students, but also to kind of have a diverse kind of palette where possible, to maybe also assess using an infographic presentation, and have some solo and group options as well. And with our area in the School of Medicine, there's always a little bit of, I suppose, push-pull, because we've got credentialing requirements. You know, we're graduating healthcare professionals who need to be ready for practice the day they leave Trinity. So, you know, we have to think of that, and you know, we still have to really rigorously assess our students. So it's really trying to kind of be as diverse as possible, but still have a very rigorous assessment system. So we're trying to kind of build that in a little bit more. Second last point, in terms of the postgrad side, I'm one of the associate directors in the School of Medicine. So I really try to kind of build in the kind of principles of UDL and what I've learned in terms of Trinity Inc. project into the postgrad side as well. And, you know, I'm really aware that with postgrad students, sometimes they do have busier lives, they have other commitments, the finance, maybe more financial pressures, more family pressures. And, you know, it's to really take that into account and bear those kind of barriers in mind. And also at the other flip side is to really, you know, take advantage of their prior learning and recognition of their prior learning. So it's kind of like being cognizant of both sides of the coin, especially in postgrad students. And then in terms of my role, I manage the annual reports of postgrad students in School of Medicine and the continuation procedure. So even how we lay out that information for students, I've tried to kind of bring in the UDL principles to that. We have a Blackboard module where all of this information is available for the postgrad students about these PhD milestones. And for instance, I have a video clip, a recorded audio of instructions of how to kind of, you know, organize their annual report, etc., so that the instructions aren't just you know, text heavy, that students can you know, access the material in different ways and in different kind of formats. So that's the postgrad side, and I suppose remembering the admin side as well. If you've got an admin role, or, you know, all of us you know, are involved with administration to a certain extent, and, you know, I really think that these principles can be brought into the admin side as well. And then I suppose the final point is kind of less tangible and less quantifiable, but I think having done the UDL training and the digital badge and kind of being involved in this kind of movement, I guess, you know, it really makes me aware of, you know, the barriers that students face, and, you know, just being really aware of, you know, the figure maybe about 20% of our students, possibly more, come from non-traditional backgrounds and face barriers to accessing learning. So even in the kind of daily interactions with students, you know, if students are going to be late for some reason, they're going to miss a class for some reason, you know, they're having difficulty with a deadline, whatever, you know, I think knowing and going through the training has really made me recognize, you know, their needs and their challenges, and to just be that little bit more understanding in terms of that. And overall, like, I feel it's such a positive thing to have such a diverse student group, and really it's to harness the strength of that diversity and bring that to the classroom. And, you know, what works for this kind of, I suppose you could say, minority, even though it's a big minority, you know, benefits the majority. And that's a really nice thing about it. So that's all I was going to say. Sorry, I think I've talked for more than 5 minutes. Apologies.
That's okay. We'll let you away with it. But thank you so much, Julie, not just for this talk, but for everything that you do for the inclusive curriculum movement in college. It's absolutely one way of putting it. Thank you so much, Julie.
No problem. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Well, I don't know who would like to. Sorry, Paula. Sorry, I'm so sorry. I've never met you before, so I was looking at you the whole time. I'm so sorry, Paula. Can I invite you up to speak? So this is going to be Paula Roberts, who is from the School of Computer Science, to speak to her practice of UDL.
Thanks, Derina.
You're very welcome.
Well, hi guys, good morning, and everybody here. I'm not sure why. Yeah. Yeah. Right, just I don't know whether I'm on big screen or little screen. Well, hello everybody. I first of all want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to speak this morning, and to wish you all a happy Ada Lovelace Day. So Ada Lovelace was the first computer programmer, and if I had a photograph of her, you wouldn't recognize her as a computer scientist at all. So Ada Lovelace was born in 18 something and wrote the first computer program for Babbage's machine. So the reason why I want to start off with Ada is that sometimes, certainly in computer science, when you look out across a lecture theatre, you see a sea of similar faces, but Ada was a very dissimilar face, and Ada did not fit into the into our idea of what a computer scientist might look like even today. When I look out across a sea of computer scientists, I see quite a homogeneous grouping of people. And I think the UGL course, just going back to all the good things that Julie was saying, made me think about, you know, obviously I had an awareness that to be a woman in computer science is quite unusual, but I didn't really have that understanding that maybe there's difference out there that is not so visible. So thinking about designing your modules with empathy and for the individual really is, I suppose, the big takeaway that I took out of the UGL module. A couple of the things that I did in practice to change on the modules that I teach on. So some of the things Julie has already mentioned, the difficulty of going second, not so the signposting of lecture material every week, using Blackboard as a central repository, putting stuff up all the time, guiding students through what sort of materials are available to them. I also diversified my reading list. I had a look at my reading list, and it was a list of very dull topics written by white men mostly. So I've tried to broaden that a little bit. So I've got some more podcasts in there, some more accessible reading materials, some more modern reading materials as well. Not necessarily, you know, specifically about the topic that I might be teaching about that week, but just a little, you know, introducing a broader range of topics. I'm fortunate enough to be able to run some assignments during the year. So I changed my assignments so that the students were allowed to choose an assignment topic. So rather than everybody in the class looking at the one topic within that sort of general area, I allowed for groups of students to choose different, more specific topics within that. So they were able to choose a topic that was more meaningful to them. And I could then group students according to their topic rather than according to, you know, some random collection or you four sitting together, so you're a group. So it was more to do with their interest in a particular topic, and that I was able to group them that way. And then I also allowed the students to present the material in a way that was meaningful to them. So they could present as a PowerPoint presentation, they could make a podcast, they could do a TikTok. I haven't had any TikToks yet, but so to do that as well. That's worked well. The only sort of downside of that is that you have to bear in mind how many videos you're going to have to watch, because sometimes that can be quite a challenge. So it's a bigger amount of material to get through to work on, and something that I'm still working on. And I think, you know, from the very beginning, Mary was saying how it's a work in progress always. Marking these different assignments is difficult sometimes too. So it does make you think about, well, what exactly is it that I want the student to get out of this assignment? Am I ticking a box because, you know, they've got their semicolon in their line of code in the right place, or are they displaying an understanding of the topic in question? Can they, you know, construct a problem in a meaningful way and translate that into a computer program or into a mathematical construction or whatever the question is? So giving the students more choice, thinking about how you can assess them and how you can put them together in a team according to their interests rather than according to something that I direct them to. And I suppose just being mindful about who they are and the individuals that they are in the theatre in front of me.
Thank you so
And
much.
that's me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I think that one of the things about, you know, saying going second, and so therefore echoing, but that's kind of what we're going to probably be hearing, that while there's a lot of universality in this and different things that you can do similarly, but there are also different ways that you can go about depending on your discipline. So I think it was really insightful too. Thank you so much. And that was the point of trying to get these three speakers, because they actually represent the three faculties, which is really great. And so finally, we've got just in terms of from faculty member, we've got Joanne Banks, who's from the School of Education.
Thanks, Derina. You asked 3 academics to keep to 5 minutes, which to me is the big error. Big error of the day. And hello, everybody online. You're very welcome. For those of you starting the module, the professional learning module, I just kind of want to say kind of congratulations for being here, and also kind of well done on being here. When I started this module a couple of years ago, I didn't have the time either. You're just like, how am I going to fit it in with whatever else I have on? And it's a huge undertaking, and I think it shows real commitment to what you're doing. And I think it's a really, really good sign from Trinity Inclusive. So the thing I would take solace from, if I were you starting out on this journey, is that you're already doing this already. You're doing this already. You're doing the inclusion piece already. And all this program did for me was it shone a light on what I'm doing well, but equally shone a light on the areas for improvement and the areas that I could enhance, and to go after those kind of really easy wins and the low-hanging fruit first. And as Derina says again and again, is that +1 approach. Just take it in baby steps, or you will become overwhelmed and completely back away. So I'll just introduce who I am. I am a lecturer in inclusive education in the School of Education, and I'm Director of Inclusion there, but I'm also a school champion for the Trinity Inclusive Curriculum Project. And I suppose my area has evolved quite a bit over time. It used to be kind of disability and special education, and has turned now and evolved into inclusion and diversity, and the language has changed. It's changed, and also I have the tensions just around how kind of meaningful it is, but also how meaningless it can become. And it's been used in the corporate world, in policy, in education, and across the board. And we have to be kind of conscious of that. And I think, Mary, you highlighted that a little bit as well. And the words are used so very frequently. I thought I'd just talk a little bit today, before I get into the changes that I made in my initial kind of when I embarked on this, is just why not do it. And I think it's always worth being aware of your own kind of barriers and the reasons maybe why this is a daunting prospect. And a lot of it's kind of beyond you as an individual. And I think we have to acknowledge the kind of history and legacy and evolution of this space and how it really guides our current thinking. And what I mean by that is we've all gone through education systems which have separated people according to a certain characteristic. Culturally and socially, we use language and terminology and judgments according to often things that separate individuals and are kind of unequal in their sentiment. So I wouldn't discount that, and that you're constantly having to break free of that mold that we have all kind of grown up in and continue to kind of operate in our society in. I also just wanted to raise the idea of fear, in that it really goes to your question, which is this idea that, oh, well, X young person or student has X characteristic, therefore I need this toolkit in order to cater for them or to address their need. And to kind of, that fear is really kind of has been embedded and kind of connected with my history and legacy comment. And that it's to kind of challenge that a little bit and to come at it from that universal perspective, is that we can wipe clear a lot of the barriers that are embedded in what we do, whether it's in an education setting, administrative role, whatever it is, by simply addressing kind of a universal need. And as Mary said earlier on, then relieving those more specialist supports for the people and individuals that need it. And the other thing that often gets me is like, what's the point? I'm the only person in my faculty or my school doing this. How am I ever going to make an impact? And I think this module is really important in getting that aggregate piece together, and that there is a community, and there always probably has been a community, but now we're kind of bound together through this module. And I think it will grow year on year, and the impact will be felt. And it's the students that will tell us that. How am I doing on time? So I just wanted to talk a little bit about my own experience. I run a number of programs, and a number of the speakers today have already mentioned this, and I think it's really important, is that I'm always learning and evolving how I kind of implement UDL in my programs. And I had a lecture a couple of weeks ago where I announced my UDL assignment, and I was like, look at all these choice and options that I'm giving to you in terms of your submission, in terms of the actual content, but also how you submit the work back to me. You can do it in video format. Oh, and also you can pick your topic. You know, I was just throwing choice around the room, and everybody, I was like, oh, this is brilliant. I've really nailed this UDL. The room exploded. They were like, where's our scaffold? Where's our question with please discuss underneath it? Where's everything that they've ever known in terms of their own educational journey? And I had to go back and reflect on that and go, okay, you know, you can't just plant this new idea onto a group of people. You have to work with them, and it has to be this lovely reciprocal relationship with your student or whoever it is that you're talking to. I just want to finish on this +1 piece, and I would really encourage it, that I started off with my low-hanging fruit was the assessment. It was one-dimensional. It was from a very other time. And it was that quotation and please discuss underneath, with one form of submission, which was the written word, the traditional academic essay. And I went for that because I thought, okay, there's flexibility here and the students will respond to it. And it is a choice. If you don't want to do a podcast or video, you can still do your academic essay. And I went with that. But year on year, I challenged myself to something new. And you know, in your own different work contexts, what that piece might be. And it will be very context specific. So there's probably no point in giving too many examples. We've had some lovely examples here already this morning. But yeah, I wish you very well. And I look forward to meeting you over the course of the module. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I remember we had, and actually it's up on our YouTube as well, Jean Reel, who spoke with us. And she said about, I'll never forget, it's choice without capacity is no choice at all. So, you know, when we're giving choice, we have to think about what skills do the students need to have in order to be able to implement that. So now we also, of course, this module is also open to all staff across Trinity. And we're delighted today to have Greg Sheaf from the library to speak about how he has implemented it in his practice. Please go.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Greg. I'm one of the librarians here at Trinity. So it's a bit of a cheat because some of my colleagues are here as well. So I already know these people, and it might well be that some of my colleagues are joining us from home. So I just want to talk a little bit how we folded in some of the principles from Universal Design for Learning into what we do in the library. And it's been very useful as a lens to try and see how we approach, how we interact with our students. Now, my manager, who's sat over there, made us all do this. I'm part of the teaching and learning element of the library. And when we were told this, we went, oh, another thing we have to go to. But it was fantastic. It's really opened our eyes to some of the stuff which, as was mentioned before, we were already doing, and then opened our eyes to see what we can do better, what we're doing well, and where we can improve. Okay, so it really is a fantastic lens to look at what you're already doing and see, can you make it even better? Okay, and with regards to the library, as said, I'm part of the teaching and learning part of the library, but I also have another hat, which is looking after the library's website. So in that respect, I was already aware of things like alternative text that enables people that cannot see an image to be able, its screen reader will then read out what that image is about. I'll come back to that in a moment on how we have to bring that into other types of learning. So with the pandemic, one of the few good things from the pandemic is it's really honed our skills on being able to use video and how to talk to people remotely. Okay, so we flipped to doing a lot of our training in video form. So doing it through Blackboard Collaborate or through Zoom, that type of thing. And then we started recording it and we thought, this is fantastic. Aren't we just great? Putting up this stuff so that people can look at it from home whenever they need to. And that was great. But what we've had to do is to evaluate that with what we know through Universal Design from Learning. And although that was fantastic, we were disenfranchising people that couldn't see those videos. Okay, so one thing that we've had to do quite recently, and is time consuming and is a change, was to go back and to subtitle those videos. And our colleagues in deaf studies said, this seems like it's a great video, but my students can't actually do anything with it because they don't know what you're saying. So one of the things we've had to realize, we need to bring everybody on board. And the thing about making it easier for people that can't hear it is it actually makes it easier for everybody. And that's another realization from this, is you don't have to, by making it easier for one group of your learners, you're actually making it easier for everybody. And you're bringing them with you. And you don't have, there is also this kind of idea, certainly in Trinity sometimes, that you need to make things hard, otherwise people aren't learning it. And that isn't true. you don't need to make it hard for the sake of it. If you can make it easier, great. And then the stuff where they really do need to engage with it and it is actually genuinely hard, you know, they can put all of their energy into understanding that. Okay, I've got no idea how long I've been speaking for, but one thing I will finish up with then maybe is just another thing which has been very useful is making us aware of how we engage with our users, how we interface with them on a day-to-day basis, and just to realize how diverse our students and our staff are here at Trinity, and that it isn't just, I mean, I could be the poster boy for, you know, cis-het white old male, but not everyone is like me. And we don't have to make things more complicated than they need to be just to make a point, okay? And we need to realize that we have no idea what's going on in people's lives and whether they've had a good day or a bad day, or whether they've had a, you know, they've been looking after the baby at home, or they're living in a shared house, or it has been a real struggle to get into Trinity or to get into Trinity today, okay? And just trying to be a bit kinder to people is not a bad thing. Okay, so I think I will leave it there. Best of luck with your engagement with this. And I will finish up by saying this is very much a journey, not a destination. Okay, so everything you learn on this will help you. That's not to say that's everything you need to know, but just getting everything a little bit better means you are better than you were yesterday. Okay.
Thanks so much, Greg. And I think one of the things that really resonated with me there was, you know, what you're going to be studying is going to be difficult enough. You know, the whole challenge of learning and, you know, kind of transforming your brain is enough. We don't have to make the process into that to access the material difficult. You know, we might as well make that part of the journey easy so they can have more energy to actually do what we actually want them to learn, you know. So right now I'm just going to share my screen again to go back to, oh, I realize it's not there anymore, just bear with me. There we go. This is to invite Reece Sheridan, who's a fourth year of European Studies, up to speak.
Good morning, folks. My name is Reece Sheridan, researcher at Asst, and it's a pleasure to be here with you this morning. I'm going to talk to you about the experience as a student who engages with UDL, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because there's plenty of good, there's plenty of bad, and there's certainly been a lot of ugly as well. I am going to be very brief. I have notes, so academics, learn a lesson from a student. Kidding. But I'd just like to say, before I even begin, my background. So first and foremost, I'm studying the Bachelor of Arts in European Studies, and I'm currently working on a thesis that examines representations of HIV and AIDS in French cinema. I also have an undergraduate certificate in innovation entrepreneurship that comes from the business school here, and I have a certificate of studies in social science and humanities from Sciences Po Paris, where I studied last year. So the first thing I'd like to address is the importance of student engagement in the context of universal design for learning. A university without students is a very large research centre, let's be honest. So the idea of universal design for learning implicates and involves a learner by its very nature. So in that way, it's essential that students are engaged. I have here on the PowerPoint a definition that's provided by Vicky Trowler in 2013 in a very interesting article, and I have all the sources here in the slides, which will be distributed after, and if you'd like to read it further. And she says that the investment of time, effort, and other relevant sources by both students and their institutions intended to optimize the student experience and enhance the learning outcomes and the development of students and the performance and reputation of the institution is what student engagement means. But by engaging students in our learning, we have to know who they are. And you're probably wondering to yourself, why is there a white man telling me all these things about inclusivity? I'm a gay man. I come from a working class background, a first generation college student, and I'm also a full-time carer for my grandmother. So again, to talk about what Mary mentioned in her PowerPoint, this intersectionality of understanding, you know, who we are and what we're bringing to the table. And like was mentioned by the previous speaker, who are you? How did you get to Trinity, not only in general, but specifically today? But what is the scope for student engagement? Whereas student engagement is often focused on government and management or quality assurance, those are the two of the three domains that are outlined by the Higher Education Authority of Ireland. We also have one that is often neglected, and that is teaching and learning. And UDL presents an ideal opportunity for us to expand this engagement into this domain. Universal design for learning and the design thinking process. Great minds think alike, full seldom differ. It was great to see that we both thought about the design thinking process when it became universal design for learning. And I would reiterate what was said by Mary Quirke, that empathy is the central, is the first and perhaps the most crucial stage of the universal design for learning process, but also design thinking as well. And as you can see in the diagram, it constantly reiterates and iterates going back to empathy. There's this feedback loop that occurs, and that's very important. And it justifies and validates in many ways the students are the so-called target market. And the corollary of that is as follows. Students are, and there's one thing I'd like you to take from this presentation, quote unquote, experts by experience. Students are experts by experience because their constant exposure to problems, their local knowledge about those problems, and indeed their ideation and desire for solutions to those problems. So I'd like to talk now a bit about, if this works. Excellent. The good, the bad, and the ugly of my own personal encounters with UDL. The good, as you can see here, is a passport, a student card, and a very big French dictionary. So as I mentioned, last year I studied at Sciences Po Paris. It's a very prestigious university in Paris. I did all my classes through French there. And I encountered some very good examples of UDL that were integrated into its teaching, learning, and assessment. The first was that as a non-native French speaker at Sciences Po Paris, I had access to dictionaries during in-person exams. In some courses that is provided at Trinity to students, in others not so much. And that is just one very simple way in which you can enfranchise an often neglected or forgotten cohort of students in your assessment. And another one that I didn't realize until it actually happened to me was the use of closed captions during live lectures. The Émile Boutmy amphitheater, which is supposed to be equivalent of like the Edmund Burke that we have here, very large amphitheater that had facilities for live closed captioning of their lectures. And I thought that was very useful, not only for students who may have a disability who would require it, but also students like myself who are non-native speakers of the language of instruction. That's another way. One that I haven't put up here, but I would also mention as well from the perspective of student in arts is a module that I took 2 years ago called Power, State and Social Movements. And that was remarkable because my first ever interaction with UDL in practice. The first thing that surprised and in some ways shocked me was this idea of standpoint epistemology. The idea that my interaction with the state and with power and with social movements would be different from that of another person. So for example, if one of my fellow students was a Black woman, she would have a very different understanding of the state than I would. And I, being a gay man, would have a different understanding of perhaps power and the state, etc., than a white man or another man of color, etc. So it's interesting and worthwhile to consider validating standpoint epistemology and what a student brings from their perspective and engagement with an issue. As a result of that, it was implemented in its assessment through a journal-style assessment, and this emphasis on reflexivity as well as reflectivity, this idea that you're reflecting, but also being reflexive about it, applying it back to yourself and your own experiences and expertise. And finally, empathy from the lecture. One of the ways that you can be a UDL champion in your own work is to be empathetic, of course, in your teaching, learning, and assessment, but also to be empathetic with students as well. I would continue what my predecessor over there said about being understanding where the student comes from and how they got into Trinity, not only in general, but today. I think that was very important. So of course, managing deadlines along caring duties is quite difficult at times, especially during the pandemic, as it was back then. So to have that empathy from lecture was really excellent. The bad, and there's quite a lot. Again, it was put very well by one of my colleagues the other day, stale, male and pale reading lists. They're everywhere. They're the bane of our existence there. But certainly, we can overcome this. And I commend what has been mentioned today about those reading lists across the faculty. It's really good to hear. And there's progress being made about that. But there's also another one that I came across during my time in another university at Sciences Po Paris, and it's the validation of accents and dialects, especially in language teaching. So of course, in academic context, we are expected to speak very clearly, very concisely, you know, with perhaps a certain accent. And I recall I was in class and one of my teachers asked me, where did you learn French? And I says, oh, I learned at Trinity College Dublin. It's a very good university in Ireland. I said, no, where did you really learn French? So when I went in the smoking areas of gay bars in Paris, it's the reason why I have this sort of like, why, I don't say we, I say why, you know. But that's the thing, you know, in these contexts, you know, understanding that a student has these life experiences that have affected them, their perception of the world, and ultimately what they will produce and the knowledge that they will produce. I think one thing that's always fascinating is that we have this idea that knowledge is very productive, and in the arts there's debates about that. We're really, I think it should be extractive. We should be taking what we already have rather than creating more. But then again, we won't get into that as philosophy, and that's not what we're here for today. Finally, the ugly. This PowerPoint slide, I'm glad to see that the person who created it is not here. This is actually from last week. It was a lecture that I attended, and as you can see very closely, it's remarkably inaccessible. There's a cultural reference to The Simpsons, which many people will get, but not everyone would. The title has been half cut out. The title of the course actually doesn't exist anymore. It's been revised since, and one thing I absolutely love is the date. It's 18th of November 2009. I hardly had my communion when that was happening. So, so if there's one thing I would like you to take from this, is that these are instances of universal design for learning, or lack thereof, which I've encountered in my student career. And although I may not be the student in most need of additional support by means of UDL, my case does show that all students benefit from inclusive teaching practices. It very much, as one of my fellow speakers said today, it's one for all and all for one. So I'd like to conclude by saying students are partners, they are experts by experience, and they are the central component of universal design for learning. Therefore, you should return to them in recourse throughout your inclusive teaching practice journey. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them after the event. Thank you very much, and best of luck with your journeys. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And without further ado, I will pass you over to Ross Coleman, who is a former student of Trinity and also our Trinity Inc. graduate intern as well.
Hello. Sorry.
I'll push this back.
How about that? Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. Is everyone online able to hear me okay? Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to see you. Well, I think today there has been a lot of talk about the earning of UDL and how it's not on the goal but rather destination. And with that in mind, I just I can take you briefly through my own my own journey through UDL. First as a student, then as an academic tutor, and finally is in the graduate So when I was a student, I mainly associated inclusive teaching with reasonable accommodations. So as a student, he was registered with the disability service. Inclusion was tied up with the disability. So an inclusive an inclusive lecturer, had an accessible teaching that they allowed students to record the lecture, and they put all of their notes on board. And so at the time, I thought the inclusivity was mainly restricted through to the main aim of disability. But then what and I was asked to become an tutor, I had to think about it from the other perspective, and so I was challenged to meeting the needs of different students who learned differently and had different challenges. So, for example, before I became a tutor, I would tend to assign my Irish language students a lot of grammar drills, and I would just expect them to learn essays and verbs off by heart. But and I became involved in teaching that really made me reflect on, okay, how can I do this differently? How can I assess them differently? How can I teach differently? And so what a few of the things that I started to do was I would incorporate more audio into my classes. I would use more authentic materials, and I would encourage them to speak more in class, so that when Anna was teaching grammar, it became more of a maths problem as opposed to a straight up, the didactic lecture. And then finally, and I became an intern with Trinity, and I became okay with the work being undertaken by the project. I realized that inclusivity is so much more than disability. Throughout my time here in Training, I worked with students with of different racial backgrounds. I've worked with mature students. I've met students who have caring responsibility. And so I really learned that UDL isn't just for disabled people, and these things that are commonly out as reasonable accommodations are actually for everyone, and that there is something that everyone should have access to. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Ross. I really appreciate it. Thank you to all of our speakers. Thank you so much to Mary Quirke, to Joanne, to Paula, to Julie, to Greg, to Reece, and to Ross. And thank you to everybody for your patience and your flexibility to respond to what we're doing right now. And apologies for going over, but thank you so much for staying with us. I'll be in touch with all of those people who are doing the module. For those who wish to do the module, please check out our website, because all the information is there, or just contact me either on Trinity Inc. at tcd.ie or Derina.johnson at tcd.ie. Okay, so thank you so much, and have a lovely day.